We're covering Washington. We're 3 days into the new Congress. The House has still yet to elect a speaker. GOP leader Kevin McCarthy has now failed 9 rounds of voting, continuing to fall short of achieving the majority required to take up the speaker's gavel. It's the first time in a century that a nominee has not won the speaker position on the first vote. And business of the House cannot move forward without a speaker, and new members cannot even be sworn into the House. Joining us to talk about this ongoing situation on Capitol Hill is Dr. Lee Hanna. He's a professor of political science at Wright State University. There's a lot of meat on this bone, Doctor, but let's just start with this one. A group of around 20 conservative holdouts, just 5% of the total House membership, to put that into perspective, continues to keep the Speaker's gavel just out of reach for Kevin McCarthy. Complicating that is that within that group of 20, there's a group of about 10 who are working together. Then there are others who are just voting on their own. What do you see as the group's goal here?
Yeah, I think that is the big question, and that is what has frustrated some of the moderates. Really, this is carryover from the election where the Republicans were disappointed with the result. You need 218 seats to have the majority. They got 222, but they were expecting 240, 250 seats. And in that way, some of these conservatives that have had issues with McCarthy could still, share their distaste for him, but he would still, easily win on the first ballot, which is what we've seen for 100 years. But what we're seeing now is this carryover. And I think the challenge is it's not clear exactly what these conservatives want. And in some ways, they all want different things. They want, prominent committee assignments. They want, different opportunities, different rules. And that's putting McCarthy in a really tough spot.
Yeah, we're now in territory that we haven't seen in over 160 years in this country. Yeah. At this point, Dr. Hanna, what is the path forward for Kevin McCarthy to speakership, if there is one?
I think with each vote, that does become a little less likely. I always hesitate to make predictions. I think the most likely scenario is that they go to his right-hand man, which will be Steve Scalise, who does have both a good relationship with kind of the moderate caucus, but also maybe a little less. He doesn't have the same history with some of these conservatives that are pushing against him. So I think that is when we see Scalise being nominated. I think that might change the entire game. But it is really anybody's guess. Perhaps there is some surprise out there that we don't know about.
Dr. Hanna, right now the GOP's majority in the House is very thin, which means they need nearly every Republican to vote and to pass legislation. If they cannot count on every vote within their own party for something like this, which is usually academic, what can the American people expect for their ability to pass any legislation over the next 2 years?
I think this has definitely shown that the speaker, whomever it is going to be weak, and they're going to have a hard time moving a lot through. They already were coming in with a Democratic Senate, which, again, Republicans had hoped they'd flip that. Of course, Biden is the president, so they already had some limitations in terms of what of their agenda could actually be accomplished. But this complicates it further, and there's 2 routes to go. One is that they maybe bend to this right of the party, and so we see maybe a House that's more entertaining, but maybe not producing a lot of legislation. The other is maybe there is an opportunity for some bipartisan consensus in the middle, where you don't see maybe the privileged conservative positions, but they find some ways to find some common ground.
Yeah, and it's always curious, too, to find out what concessions any speaker might make in order to win that, because that could be a big story as well. Dr. Lee Hanna, professor of political science at Wright State University. Still a lot with this story. We thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Hanna.
Thanks, John.